Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning, Janine.
To us
and
a good day.
Evening, or
yes,
whenever our guests are watching us. Whatever.
That's right. We happen to be recording this on a morning in January, but it's neat to know that we have been doing this for now. Let me look. This will be number 74. So for 74 straight weeks, we have had some wonderful conversations with people who either lived during the 1950s, such as we did, or whose life has been inspired by someone who lived in the 1950s. And of course, that really broadens the category and the realm of guests that we can have on our Fun Chat. Because generations who lived and were born after the generation of those baby boomers, I'm certain have stories to tell too about the influencers in their lives from the 1950s. And how often is it, Jackie, that our guests will talk about their relatives, their parents, their grandparents from who lived through the Depression days, who lived through the 1940s, such as our parents did and were married then, and could have been influenced by the lives that were lived in the decades ahead of the 1950s. So, Jackie, there are many, many stories to tell, and we are open to telling them. But before we get to our guest today, can you do a little housekeeping for us, please?
I will be glad to do that. Okay. Viewers, please look in the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a blue banner with www, While the Windmill Watched, running across the bottom. That is our website, and you please do go to it because you'll find information about the book, about the authors, about our vendors, about our events that we might be gracing, I guess we could say, and the 1950s Fun Chat. Janine mentioned we have 74, and this one is not on there yet, but it will be at the end of this week. You may go and look at it though on YouTube after Monday night. It will air for the first time 8 o'clock Central Time on the YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And as you're perusing your screen, I'd like to have you take a look at the upper right-hand corner. You see a copy of our beautiful book. And there is on top of it a beautiful North Dakota sunset. You'll see the silhouette of two little girls and the windmill, who happens to be one of the speakers in the book. So you'll also note there's a little white dot in the right-hand corner that you can't see too well, but it says it is the National Independent Press Award in the regional nonfiction category for the distinguished favorite, as a distinguished favorite. Now, this our book was published in April 2021. The book was honored in April 22 with this award. So on with the show. Let me introduce you, our guest. Fern Bailey entered this world on May 15th, 1945 in Britton, South Dakota, which claimed the closest hospital to her family farm south of Cogswell, North Dakota.
And Cogswell is where?
In North Dakota.
Southeast, isn't it?
Southeast. Oh, it is southeast, right? She lived on that farm until she left to further her education at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, which is north, up the road a piece, where she majored in mathematics with science and French minors. Fern married Harris Bailey in her junior year at UND. Professionally, she had taught grade 9 mathematics in Bloomington, Minnesota, and Oaks, North Dakota, and at the Learning Center at North Dakota State College of Science. She has done accounting and taxes in her husband's CPA office and has substituted in the classrooms. After attending seminary classes in Chicago, Fern served as a licensed local pastor for 2 small churches near Wahpeton. So Fern and Harris have participated in the life-changing foster care program. They now live in Wahpeton, North Dakota. So Fern, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Thank you.
Great you're here. So we're going to have you delve back into the recesses of your brain and tell us what is the earliest memory, you have of living on your parents' farm. And how old were you when this memory came?
My earliest memory living on the farm was when I was 3 years old, and we were building our house. And for the summer, we lived in a small building, which became our garage. And part of the garage was a 2-story. So we slept in the loft on the upper part of the part that was 2-story. And we lived there all summer. And, while the house was being built. And the other thing, probably my earliest memories were of playing with my brother. I had a brother that was 3 years older than I, and a sister that was 6 years older. And I think she probably had more chores to do. So it was usually my brother and I that played.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't really like to play dolls. So most of the time I played trucks with him out, and we had sandy soil. And so I played trucks with him instead. And most of the time, and in the winter, he used to hook a sled up to our dog, would harness the dog. And our grandparents lived right across the road, down our lane and down the road a little bit and into their lane. And he would go over there and then call our dog. And I would have to hang on as tight as I could as we went through the snow. Usually the dog rolled me into the snow when he did a corner, because the sled went sliding off to the side. But once in a while, I'd make it all the way to my grandparents on the sled.
How fun was that? So then how did you get home? How did you get home then?
Well, it was right across the road. We'd walk home. We'd actually walk back both of us would walk back to our house and do it again.
Oh,
But it was always my brother that did I was always the rider, and he was always the one that went over and called the dogs. So we had a lot of fun. My brother was really great playmate for me.
Good. Did you ever teach him how to make mud pies? If you played trucks.
Well, I don't know if he made the mud pies, but he was great construction. He eventually became an architectural draftsman. But he fixed up a playhouse for me out in the trees and built a lot of it. And in fact, he used a post auger to dig a hole deep so I could put my water down there in a jug and pull it up. And it was cold. It kept cold all summer long.
Nice. Good. He was using his brain for his future. He just didn't know it. I mean, this was the roots of his future.
Right. But he did so much of, my mother always said that he really watched out for me when we were out in the pasture one time when the cattle came up, and she said she looked out and was ready to go to call us in. And she says, here he was, and he lifted the fence so that I could get through before he climbed through.
Oh, so. Is that your only sibling?
No, I have a sister that was 6 years older. And so when we were younger, I think she had more of the chores in the house and like that. My brother did more of them outside. My earliest memory of a chore was gathering eggs. That was my responsibility to gather the eggs. And sometimes those chickens were cooperative and sometimes not. But that was one of my chores. And another one at an early age was to take a pint of milk over to my grandfather. After my grandmother died, I would take a pint of milk over to him every morning after we milked. And and because of that, I got to know my grandfather a lot better. And he taught me some Norwegian. I learned a table grace and the Lord's Prayer. And I remember the table grace, but the Lord's Prayer is long gone.
Yes. That's what a special relationship.
And did you find yourself having other chores then as you got older?
Yes, yeah, we all did. And I think that's one of the good things of the 50s. We were all expected to really work and on the farm and do things. I used to, gardening time was a lot, and mowing the lawn was one of my jobs. And while I did a little bit out in the field, but very little. My brother usually did that.
Sure.
And but I think the main part was the gardening in the summer. In the winter, I don't remember as many outside chores, of course, on the farm. My brother and father did all of the chores of milking the cows and such like that. So,
did you ever have any blizzards that you had to be concerned about in your childhood?
And I loved blizzards. Actually, I still like the weather stuff today. When I'm fascinated with tornadoes, I remember my father and I going outside watching a tornado going by, and my mother was really frantic, wanting us to be inside. She was yelling at me, and I said, "I'm with Dad." Much, but blizzards. We had some blizzards, but they were always a time when we'd get out a jigsaw puzzle, and we were stormed in. Sometimes we weren't able to go to school. And when the school finally started up, my dad would sometimes have to take us a half a mile down on a tractor to meet where the plows had already plowed out the roads to get to the school bus.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite friend on the school bus?
Definitely. Sue was my best friend. She lived about 3 miles north of us, and she was my best friend all the way through school. And graduating together, we sometimes double dated when we were in high school together. And but she went to NDSU while I went to UND, so that was where we parted. But we remained friends totally to this day. Very good friends.
That brings forth the question. We're kind of jumping beyond the 50s for this one, but how did you happen to choose your majors? Math and science and French for minors.
Well, math was easy for me. I liked math a lot. My mother had an 8th grade education. My father had an 8th grade, but he only went a few months of each year back then. And so he had a 5th grade education, but he could work any math problems that my sister or any of us had all the way through high school. And I think that math was handed down to my sister, and I both ended up math teachers. And so I think that was part of it. That he was
genetics
in it.
Yeah, genetics. And then had you taken French in high school?
No, we didn't have any. We had Latin offered in high school, and I took a year of Latin. We only had 1 year offered, and I took that. But that was the only thing. We didn't have any languages offered back then.
I see. Okay, so
how did you anticipate using the French as a minor? Was that correct?
Right. I was fascinated with other languages, because of not having it. I think sometimes what you don't have, you wish you had. And so I thought French was just a romantic language. So I decided to pick French for the one and then got a minor in it. So
and they didn't
really, I have never really used it to become proficient in it. I think you have to live in a country where they speak French in order to do that.
Sure.
Yes.
But it was it has something that I have enjoyed having, and I can read French better than I can listen to it
and speak it. Yes, and Norwegian probably wasn't offered at UND at that time.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the 50s now. So I understand you were in 4-H. So what outstanding 4-H experiences come to mind for you?
Well, I was happy. I was happy when I got to be in 1955 when I got to be 10 years old. So I was old enough to go to 4-H because my brother and sister were already able to do that before. My best friend Sue's mother was our 4-H leader. One of them, we had two, but she they really taught us a lot of things. We learned how to set correct table setting and cooking and sewing. Cooking and sewing, my mother was very good at and would have taught us anyway. But I think the benefit of 4-H was that we had to give demonstrations. I remember giving one on how to make muffins.
Oh,
Well, I think that must have been a common one that we started with or something, but I did that demonstration, and I know I did it at the county level.
Mhm.
And from that, eventually, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be the delegate from our county to conservation camp up at Lake Metagoshi,
Mhm.
and to Achievement Institute, which is was held where now NDSU is. I think back then it was AC, but
Yeah.
I remember at conservation camp, I learned how to dress inside my sleeping bag. It was cold it was on the Canadian border, and we were there in June, and it was so cold. I remember I just hated to get outside, so I'd have my clothes right up beside me, and then I'd put them inside my sleeping bag to warm up while I got into them. So
Yeah.
you learn all kinds of things from necessity.
Yeah.
That's right.
Fern, when you went to 4-H Institute, was that the time when Festival Hall was still there? The meetings were held in Festival Hall, that big white barn type building on campus?
Probably, and I'm not positive where we met. I remember it was my first example of staying in a dormitory. That. So we stayed in a dormitory there in the summer. It was during the summer, but that's probably where we met. I don't know the NDSU campus as well as you do.
Yes. Well, I just remember that old barn and the hardwood floors that creaked when you walked on them. And I think they had theater style seating, didn't they, Jackie?
They did. Right, they did.
Yes.
That's where I took my freshman psych class.
Oh,
The
really?
place was full. Yeah, it was a big. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes. And Fern, then going to UND, and you married your husband when you were a junior. Did you know him prior to going to UND?
I knew who he was. Wyndmere was a rival school for sports, and he was a basketball player, and I was a cheerleader, so I knew who he was. Other than that, we didn't really meet until in college.
Okay. Did you ever go to any roller skating parties or ice skating parties or anything like that, or rock and roll dances?
We did a lot of that in high school. We would go up to Lisbon, North Dakota. They had a roller rink there, or to Cayuga, North Dakota. They had an indoor one there. The one in Lisbon had a roof over it, but it was an outside one in the park, but with a roof. I remember learning how to roller skate in our corn crib, though, when it was empty. And we had the kind of skates that you attach, you just buckle them onto your shoes.
Yes. With a key.
Right. But they were great in our corn crib when it was empty. Sure. But we went to dances. School dances mostly, or during 4-H. We had 4-H, when we'd go to 4-H camp, they had dances there. I probably learned more dancing at 4-H camp than I did at school.
Yeah. Where was your 4-H camp located?
Cheyenne Valley.
Okay. Pretty Valley. That's a beautiful place in North Dakota.
Right.
For going back to roller skating, because I only roller skated, I think, once or twice in my life. What was the purpose of the key?
You'd tighten the onto your shoe. You had to, it was where it was like a vice, where you would tighten it up. The key would tighten it up, and then it would stay on. Ice skates. We had ice skates, and we had a little pond where the cows would drink out of. And in the winter, we always cleaned it off and would go out ice skating. I remember my brother and I would skate for so long that when we'd come in, our toes woed be white. But back out the next day, it was not such severe frostbite, but they were getting toasty cold.
Yes.
Toasty cold.
Yes. Yeah. Did you ever have an issue on the ice where the wind had made, as the water was freezing, the wind had made ripples in the ice, and so you had to skate over those ripples?
Not too much, because it was in a very protected area where there were trees all around. So the wind wouldn't have been so bad right in that area where our water was. And so not too bad. It used to be a few times you'd leave a ridge or something when you were shoveling off the snow. So sometimes you had, but we learned to ice skate very much. When I went when I met my husband, he did not do much ice skating, but I would skate backwards while he would skate frontwards.
Show off. Good.
Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. Go ahead.
What family members or experiences of the decade of the 1950s influenced you in your adult life?
I think probably mostly my parents were the most influencing on me. And also, my parents were very loving and giving people. And we had extended family that lived with us for various reasons. My grandparents lived in a little house, right across, my paternal grandparents. And then my mom's mother, and I had an uncle that was deaf, that never, back then they didn't go to school in his generation. And so he remained with my grandmother all the time after my grandfather died. They came and lived in a trailer house on our farm. And but other than that, we had also took in, my dad came from a family of 11 children. And one of his older brothers, his wife had died about the time I was born. And then after he died about 4 years later, and they left several children. And those children, some of them lived with us. The youngest girl was about 8 when she came and lived with us for a little bit. For a while, the older daughters had kept them going in the house on the farm, not too many miles from our farm. But my dad hired all the teenage boys as his hired men. I think he was actually keeping an eye on them. I think it was beneficial to both of us, to our family, to have them help, and it was also beneficial to them to have that. So they grew up, and then when one of them got married, then the youngest girl, Barbie, went to live with Keith and Jeannie, and so then remained with them later. But I think because of that, we always had extended family living with us almost the entire time that I was growing up. And I think that had an impact on how we later in our lives, we ended up having people live with us. We took in foster children, and we also had exchange students. We had one from Finland and one from Germany. But I think I remember my mother, when we had a little girl that we had from 10 months old to 18 months old, and when she was leaving, I know it was hard on all of us because we were going to miss her. But my parents drove over from Oaks all the way over to say goodbye. So they learned to love her too. And my mom, I remember her telling me, Fern, you can't take in the whole world. And I said, where did I learn this?
But tell us, in the foster care that you have done so lovingly, and prior to that, with your parents' influence and on your life in bringing in more children into the home, what effect did that have on you?
I think it made me much more aware of, I had such a loving family to grow up in, and it was a reality check to realize that not all children are as fortunate as I was in having a loving family. And some of them had, for various reasons, they have needs of to have a different family for a little while. I know one of the things that we had a speaker that talked to us, a psychologist, that said, what you give to the children, the love and that you give to the children, and a secure atmosphere, they will always try to strive to reach that satisfaction of security in their later lives. So that even though you only have maybe 1 year or 2 years, that you have given them a basis for that security that they want to have. And that helps when you have to say goodbye, because you shed tears that you do when you go to say goodbye. But because of that foster, because of this experiences of giving more love, I think the more you love, you find out you have a lot more love to give. And our daughter, we have one daughter that has done foster care and has had a lot more foster children than what we ever had. But and then I think and then actually my other daughter has a son who did foster care too. They're just shortly out of college now, but they have done some foster care too for a few and up in Fargo. So,
have you ever heard from the children who were cared for in your home?
Some of them, the older ones, yes. You know, like we had a boy that was high school age, and you know, he stayed with us until he turned 18, and we hear from him some. We have another one that we unofficially, it wasn't through the county because she was already a senior and going to be 18, so she had been in foster care earlier in her life, but at that point she was a classmate of our one daughter, and so she moved in with us in her senior year, and she is a daughter to us now too. Sure. Her kids call us grandpa and grandma and like that.
So wonderful.
What is the first step that a foster parent does when a foster child comes into the home?
I think you have to learn to accept who they are, and then try to be very patient in setting an example of what good behavior is, because many of them come in not knowing that. Depending on the age, sometimes you have little toddlers that are just infants. We had and we had one come in at 10 months old, and we had him until 3, and then we adopted him. He went up for adoption at that point, and so at that point we adopted him. He now lives in Australia.
Okay. Huh. Do you ever get to go see him?
Yes, we've been over to see him 4 times. And the first time he went, he asked us in January of 2014 what we thought about an offer that he had from a friend of his whose wife was from Australia, and they were going back, and he wanted to know if Damien wanted to come and help open up a restaurant. Our son is a chef. Nice. And so he asked what we thought, and I said, "You're single, go for it. What an experience, enlightening, I love to travel." And so, and so I encouraged that with him too. He had already been to Germany with us one time to see our exchange student, and Finland to see that one too. But, and so he had some experience in traveling. He had done a mission trip to Jamaica. So he wasn't just real shy, he was able to do this on his own. So we encouraged him. Well, little did we know that he'd fall in love and stay there.
That happens.
It does. But we're happy for him. And, you want your children to be happy. And even if it's far apart, I talk to him every week. He calls every week. So more than when he was living in Fargo.
Sure. Yeah. With your foreign exchange students, I know this is past the 50s, but Jackie and I had in our family hosted a foreign exchange student in the 1950s. I believe it was about 1956. And this was through the International Foreign Youth Exchange, the IFE program. Were your foreign exchange students through the IFE program?
No, ours was the AFS, which was the American Field Service.
Oh, okay, yes.
I knew some people that were on the IFE program too, but the ones at our school, we had a chapter in our school of that, and so every year somebody would host a student every year, and no matter how old they were, usually they were 16, 17 or right around there, and no matter how old they were all seniors in our school. So they always got to give a graduation address.
Yes. Well, I think we had our Algaroth came from Uruguay. And didn't she stay with us for 6 weeks?
I think so.
And that was the only time that I can recall when Dad would choose to get away from farm work for a day and take us to see different sites within the state of North Dakota. It was important for them to show Olga what the state of North Dakota had for features. And for opportunity.
And didn't she speak German, and Dad tried to, or was that somebody else?
I don't think she spoke German. I just remember we had a Spanish your Spanish English dictionary.
Right.
And,
okay. And he would say, "Get the book." It
yeah.
he kept on top of our refrigerator. And he said, "Okay,
Yes.
get the book," so he could translate.
So did your foreign exchange students know English pretty well?
Yes, they're very well. I think Europe was very ahead of us in that aspect.
They
We were
still
younger.
are.
You know, when we were younger, there weren't any exchange students coming. So that was a little bit older. You know, what in the 50s, we didn't have that. But I think that Europe was far advanced in that, in teaching English to their students.
Sure.
Right. Exactly.
In fact, their year living in did not count for any classes except English. They got credit for English by living a year. Now, the AFS is a whole year program. Some other ones are just like where they live in 2 or 3 homes. And there are advantages to that, but there's also advantages to living a whole year. I think the whole year, you get a real feeling. You're not a guest anymore.
Yeah.
A few weeks, you're still kind of a guest.
Oh, okay. So, how have your school and church, your interest in school and church, and how has that resulted in employment choices as an adult?
Well, I think school was easy for me. And, you know, it came easy for me, even though my parents didn't have a high education. My mother was very good in spelling and took an interest. Both of them, I think, because of not having much education, were very adamant about the fact that all of the 3 of us children were going to have college educations even, you know, and that they were very much on that. But my mom always said that she thought I got my spelling ability from her. When I was, we always had a county spelling contest, and I always came out top in the county. And, but then there was also in 7th and 8th grade, what they called the Minneapolis Spelling Bee. And that paper that had all those spelling words you had to know was like a newspaper, and it had so many words. Some of them she couldn't even pronounce that I'd try learning to spell. Well, when I was a 7th grader, I came in second to an 8th grader.
Wow.
You know, and got to go to Minneapolis. And so I just knew that when I was an 8th grader, I was going to be able to go to Minneapolis. Well, little did I know that here a 7th grader came in and got first, and I got second again. So she had to go to Minneapolis. And I thought, well, it was a really good lesson in humility.
Yes. So when you went to Minneapolis,
I did.
Oh, you didn't. I thought you said you did.
I missed it again. I got second.
Okay. All right. Oh, but well, you certainly had a natural gift for evidently then looking at a word and seeing it and being able to remember how to spell it, because so many words in our English language are not spelled phonetically. So it'd be difficult.
Right. So so that was, that was something that came easy for me. Mathematics came easy for me, and that's what I ended up majoring in. And I think that was from my father. But those things, I think, ended up, and I love school. I used to play dolls, having them in school. I was the teacher. They all behaved very much. But my brother would never play school with me. But he says that he thinks he helped me in my spelling, because when he would have been 3 years older, and when he was a 5th grader, he wanted a bicycle. And they told him that if he would get A's in spelling, which he was not getting A's before that, but if he would get A's in spelling the rest of the year, that they would give him a bike at the end of the year. And so my brother memorized every single word in his spelling book, so that and my mom, to make it more fun, would have me they'd line us up in our kitchen. We had a one wall that was empty, and she'd line us up and give me the spelling words first. And if I spelled it correctly, then she'd go on to another one. But if I missed it, he had to spell it. And so that's how we played the game, kind of in that. And he got his bike, and I learned how to spell. As a 2nd grader, I knew all his 5th grade spelling words.
Whoa, good for you. Good for you.
I think that's how the teaching, I think, came about, as far as wanting to be teaching. And our family was always, we always went to church, and that was important to, in our family. I think when I didn't know that I was going to become a pastor until very late in life here. But I think part of my interest in religion, it was very evident early. I said when I was when I was a child of about 6 or 7, I used to have nightmares, and two types of nightmares that were always recurrent. One was that a skunk was chasing me up the tree, and I'd have to wait in the tree until my brother would come and rescue me. Now that didn't, it probably happened once, but I used to dream about that one come back. The other one was that it was a time when my mom's brother was in World War II. And I think there were some stories told, that I would overhear probably as a child a little bit. And so I used to have dreams of that enemy armies came onto our farm. And so I would wake up just frightened, and I was too old to go climb in bed with my mom and dad. So in my mind, I would tell them about Jesus and have them to be good people, like that Christians were good people. And I'd turn them all into Christians, and then I could go back to sleep because they were good people.
Well, good for you. You were witnessing as a little girl.
So that's how I started in my religion. But in high school, when I got up to high school, I went into, I was a district officer in our church office. And I had a pastor in my high school who actually, I think in your book, you mentioned that you had that same pastor, Reverend Parker.
Yeah.
And he was my pastor that probably influenced me the most in high school. And he really wanted me to go to a Bible college and right out of high school. And I didn't listen to him, but eventually he was not living anymore by the time, but eventually I got to seminary. So in a long run, I did.
Step by step.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, Fern, we're nearing the end of our time on our fun chat. My goodness, this has gone quickly. I like to ask folks what is a fun memory from the 1950s that you can identify?
I think one of the most fun things was when in 1958, while my sister was in college and my brother in high school, and I would have been in 7th grade, 8th grade. And we decided to take a family trip because of it was while our family was still all intact before my sister was getting ready to get married or anything. And we went around North Dakota, living on a farm and having cattle. You didn't really have an option to really take many vacations. So other than going up to Jamestown to see my grandparents, we really didn't take any vacations. But we went on that one summer, we decided to go around North Dakota. When you mentioned about your exchange student, that's kind of what we did. We went up to Devil's Lake and spent the first night with my mom's brother and his wife. And then we went on to the Peace Gardens and saw that. Rugby, the center of North America, we saw that. And then up to the Peace Gardens and into Canada to say we had been in Canada and over and down through Minot. I remember in Minot, my mom insisted on filling up with gasoline at a station where they gave green stamps.
Yeah.
My father did a lot of kidding, teasing, and never let her forget that there were about 3 or 4 gas stations that were cheaper, but that we got her green stamps.
Yeah. What did she do with those green stamps? Do you remember?
Oh yes, we had gold bond stamps and green stamps, and we used to get dishes, or we'd get all kinds of things. I remember we got a footstool one time. You just got all kinds of things from redeeming those when she had books filled with them. Right. We got them from groceries also. But and then from Minot, we went down to see Garrison Dam, and then we got down to we went to Medora, saw the play there. And went out to Montana, just into the Montana, probably 2 or 3 miles and back. Say we'd been in Montana. Prior to that, I'd only been in South Dakota and Minnesota because those are right close to us.
Sure.
And, so those were the only states I'd been in until after we were married.
So did you go to Bismarck in the capital?
Yes, and then we went to Bismarck on the way back, and we also went out to Mandan to the Trail West. That was kind of like. Yes. Did you see that one too? It was the pageant or the play. Right. You know, we spent the night there and then the next day home. And that's the only time we took a trip as I was growing up.
Yeah, what a great trip, though.
It was a civics lesson, a North Dakota civics lesson right there is what you had on that trip.
And geography.
Yes, wonderful. And Fern, from the 1950s, what do you think was the highlight of that decade that has influenced your adult life?
I think it's kind of a general highlight, but I think the fact that in the 50s, it was really a healthy time to be a family. It was family oriented, and you know, it was the Depression years were over, and people were very relieved about that, and so times were better. Now, we did not have a lot of money, but we always had food because of living on a farm, and my mom made all our clothes. But I think the fact that we were living in a time where being good was very much a norm.
Yes.
Yeah. I think of so many things in the news today and in the world today that are going on, and partially because back then we had radios and I remember in 56 getting a television, but we didn't have all the news that they have today, that instant where you are plugged into all of it. And I think that in some ways protected us, but it also made us maybe a little naive, you know, and also, but I think that was a very wholesome time to grow up.
Wholesome, that's a great word to describe the 50s. And time after time, our guests who lived in the 50s have shared that. It certainly impacted us and imprinted on us as that generation. And I love the word wholesome.
And I think wholesome and a good work ethic.
Yes.
I think that
we had to, if we were going to survive especially in a rural environment, we had to get along in our families and work together as a family. Well, viewers, this has been our pleasure to share the story of the 1950s of Fern Bailey, who grew up at Cogswell, North Dakota, and now resides in Wahpeton, North Dakota, not too far from Cogswell. And we do thank her so much for sharing that story. And as we so gratefully record every week a story of a person who is so totally different from one to the next to the next. Even though we all lived during that time, some of us might have lived in a rural environment, some of us might have lived in an urban environment, but it basically comes down to one final decision, and that all of us have our own unique stories, and we'd like to share yours as well. So next time, we will come back with another unique story of someone who lived during the 1950s, and we know you will want to join us. Jackie, how can you conclude our program today?
Well, it's another housekeeping message, and that is, viewers, please hit the red subscribe button. Also, click that blue thumbs up button and tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. So till next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.